A grieving husband was banned from his own wife's funeral by his own son. But what no one knew was that one rainy night would uncover a conspiracy, expose a trusted lawyer, and change their family forever. Watch until the end to discover the shocking truth behind what really happened. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional mystery stories with unforgettable twists. I never imagined that the hardest day of my life would begin with two strangers standing between me and my wife's funeral. My name is Selim Voss, and for 38 years my wife Alara was the center of my world. We built our lives quietly in Ashbourne, a town where people knew one another by name, and where trust often mattered more than wealth. I had spent most of my career working as a forensic accountant, uncovering financial fraud that others failed to notice. Retirement had finally given me the chance to slow down, while Alara continued teaching piano to children who adored her patience and kindness. We were never interested in luxury. We valued honesty, routine, and family. At least I believed we all valued the same things. The morning of her funeral arrived beneath heavy gray clouds. Rain had already begun falling before sunrise, covering the streets with a cold shine that matched the emptiness inside me. I drove to the cemetery alone because my son Darian had insisted he would handle every funeral arrangement himself. He claimed it would be easier for me to avoid the stress. At first, I thought he was trying to protect me from overwhelming grief. Looking back now, I realize he was keeping me away for reasons I didn't yet understand. As I approached the entrance, I noticed two large security guards standing beside a temporary gate. They weren't employees I recognized from the cemetery. Both wore black suits and discreet earpieces. One of them stepped forward before I could even reach the path leading toward the chapel. "Good morning, sir. May I have your name?" His voice remained polite, but his posture made it clear I wouldn't be passing until he allowed it. "Selim Voss," I answered. "I'm here for my wife's funeral." The guard looked down at a digital tablet. His finger slowly moved across the screen before his expression became strangely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. Your name isn't on today's guest list." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "What do you mean I'm not on the list?" "Alara Voss is my wife." The second guard checked the same list before quietly shaking his head. "We've been instructed not to admit anyone whose name doesn't appear here." I felt my heartbeat becoming louder than the rain around me. There has to be some mistake. Then I heard footsteps behind the gate. My son appeared. Darian looked exhausted, but there wasn't any sadness in his eyes when he saw me. There was determination, almost relief. "You shouldn't have come," he said. I stared at him in disbelief. "Shouldn't have come? She's my wife." He folded his arms. "The ceremony is private." I couldn't believe those words had come from my own son. Private? Since when does a husband need permission to attend his own wife's funeral? People arriving behind us slowed their cars as they noticed the argument unfolding near the entrance. Some recognized me immediately. They whispered to each other but avoided making eye contact. Darian refused to look at me directly. "This is how Mom wanted it." "No," I answered immediately. "Your mother would never do this." His jaw tightened. "You don't know everything." The sentence hit harder than I expected. For weeks before Alara died, something had changed inside our family. She became unusually quiet. Sometimes I would wake during the night and find her sitting alone in the living room reading legal papers she quickly hid whenever I entered. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and insisted she was only organizing old documents. I wanted to believe her because we had always trusted each other. Then, about 3 weeks before her death, she asked me an unusual question while we were having breakfast. "Selim, if someone secretly changes a legal document after it's signed, could anyone ever prove it?" I laughed softly and told her that almost everything leaves evidence if someone knows where to look. She didn't laugh back. Instead, she simply nodded as though she had expected that answer. At the time, I dismissed the conversation as nothing more than curiosity. Standing outside the cemetery gates in the pouring rain, I suddenly remembered every detail of that morning. Maybe it hadn't been curiosity at all. Maybe it had been fear. The guards remained silent while rain soaked my coat. Darian turned around without another word and walked toward the chapel. The heavy gates closed behind him. I watched guests disappear inside to say goodbye to the woman I loved while I stood outside like a complete stranger. Minutes passed before I finally lowered my head and walked toward a wooden bench near the cemetery entrance. I sat there alone beneath the rain, replaying every strange conversation Alara and I had shared during her final weeks. That was when I noticed someone leaving the chapel much earlier than everyone else. Ridian Mercer, my wife's longtime attorney, walked briskly across the parking area carrying a locked black briefcase. He looked around carefully before climbing into a dark sedan and driving away. At that exact moment, something deep inside me told me that my exclusion from the funeral wasn't the real story. It was only the first move in a much larger plan. I remained on that rain-soaked bench long after the funeral had begun. Every instinct I had developed during 35 years of investigating financial fraud told me that something was terribly wrong. People often believe deception started with forged signatures or hidden accounts. They were mistaken. Deception almost always began with behavior. A conversation cut short. An unnecessary excuse. A door that suddenly became locked. My son refusing to let me attend my own wife's funeral wasn't an emotional decision. It was a decision someone had convinced him was necessary. The cemetery gradually emptied over the next 2 hours. Black umbrellas disappeared one by one until only maintenance workers remained. I never saw Darian leave. Either he intentionally avoided me, or someone had arranged for him to use another exit. I wasn't interested in chasing him anymore. Not yet. I needed facts before confronting anyone. Facts had protected me throughout my career. They would protect me now. I drove home through the storm, the windshield wipers struggling against the relentless rain. The house felt colder than it ever had before. Alara's reading glasses still rested on the coffee table beside the novel she had never finished. Her favorite blue cardigan remained hanging on the hallway rack exactly where she had left it. Everywhere I looked, I found reminders of an ordinary life that had been interrupted without warning. Yet beneath that sadness, another feeling slowly emerged. Suspicion. I walked into my old home office and opened the locked cabinet where I kept records from my professional years. Most people assumed retirement meant abandoning old habits. Mine had never disappeared. Every important conversation, every contract, every unusual financial transaction I encountered had taught me one lesson. Document everything. Alara understood that better than anyone. She often teased me for keeping duplicate copies of documents that already had duplicate copies. Now I wished I had encouraged her to be even more careful. As I searched through our household records, I found nothing unusual. Insurance policies were untouched. Property records matched the originals. Utility accounts showed no suspicious activity. It almost convinced me I had imagined the warning signs. Then I remembered Ridian Mercer leaving the funeral early with that locked black briefcase. Lawyers rarely abandon funeral services before grieving families, unless something else demanded their attention. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't called in years. One name immediately caught my attention. Leora Sen. The last time we had spoken was nearly 8 years earlier during a corporate embezzlement investigation. She had been one of the few investigators who genuinely appreciated evidence instead of assumptions. Back then she worked as a financial crimes investigator. Since then, I had heard she had become director of a specialized financial crimes recovery unit handling complex fraud cases involving estates, trusts, and corporate manipulation. I hesitated only briefly before pressing the call button. She answered after the third ring. Selim? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I wish I had a better reason for calling. She recognized the weight in my voice immediately. What happened? My wife passed away. I'm so sorry. Thank you. But that's not why I'm calling. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Tell me everything. I began at the beginning. Alara's strange questions about altered legal documents. Her increasing anxiety during the final weeks of her life. Darian suddenly taking complete control of the funeral arrangements. The security guards. Being denied entry. Ridian Mercer leaving the cemetery before the ceremony had ended. Leora interrupted only once. You said Mercer carried a locked briefcase? Yes. Did he appear nervous? He appeared focused. Like someone protecting something valuable. She became quiet again. Selim, did your wife ever digitize important records? I looked toward the bookshelf where Alara kept several labeled storage boxes. She scanned almost everything. Good. That's where we start. I immediately retrieved her external backup drive from the cabinet beneath the desk. It contained thousands of neatly organized folders covering years of tax records, medical reports, insurance files, family photographs, and legal correspondence. Alara believed paper could be lost, but digital copies provided another layer of security. I connected the drive to my computer. Most folders open normally. Then I noticed something impossible. A folder named Estate Originals appeared empty. Not deleted. Empty. Its creation date remained unchanged, but every file inside had vanished. Leora, I whispered into the phone. Someone cleaned out one specific folder. Don't touch anything else, she replied calmly. An empty directory often tells us just as much as a missing one. I frowned. What do you mean? If someone intentionally removed those files instead of deleting the entire folder, they expected you to look there. That means they weren't trying to erase history. They were trying to replace it. Those words sent a chill through me stronger than the rain outside. I checked the folder properties. The last modification date wasn't years ago. It was only 6 days before Alara died. My hands froze above the keyboard. Someone had accessed my wife's estate records less than a week before her death. And whoever did it knew exactly which files to remove. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty folder on Alara's backup drive, and remembered the expression on Rydian Mercer's face as he hurried away from the cemetery with his black briefcase. My grief had not disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer only the pain of losing my wife. It had become the determination to understand why someone would tamper with her records only days before she died. At sunrise, Leora Sen arrived at my house carrying nothing more than a slim laptop and a leather notebook. She greeted me with quiet sympathy before getting straight to work. That was one of the reasons I had trusted her years ago. She understood that emotions deserved respect, but evidence demanded attention first. I'd like to examine the backup drive without opening any additional files, she said. I nodded and handed it to her. She connected the drive to a portable forensic device that automatically created a protected copy before analyzing its contents. Never investigate the original if you can avoid it, she explained. If someone challenges our findings later, we need to prove nothing was altered after today. Watching her work reminded me of my own career. Procedures existed for a reason. Facts became stronger when handled correctly. Several minutes passed before she looked up. The folder isn't truly empty. I frowned. It isn't. No. The visible files are gone, but traces of them remain inside the file allocation records. She turned the screen toward me. Rows of technical information filled the display. Someone removed the documents using specialized software. That's far more deliberate than dragging files into the recycle bin. So whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. She nodded. And they expected nobody to perform a forensic examination. By late morning we drove to the cloud storage company that managed Alara's online backups. Fortunately, she had enabled archival synchronization years earlier, meaning older versions of deleted files could sometimes be recovered from secure servers even after disappearing from local devices. The company required legal authorization before releasing anything. Fortunately, Leora's position allowed her to begin an emergency preservation request while formal paperwork was processed. The technician assigned to assist us disappeared into a secure server room for nearly an hour. When he finally returned, he carried a small encrypted drive. We located archived versions, he said. Most files were deleted 6 days before Mrs. Voss passed away. My stomach tightened. Leora thanked him before we returned to her office. Inside a secure examination room, she unlocked the recovered archive. Dozens of documents immediately appeared. Original estate paperwork, property schedules, correspondence with financial institutions, personal letters, everything that had vanished from Alara's backup drive. But one file immediately caught my attention. It wasn't a document. It was a video recording. The file name read simply, "If necessary." Neither of us spoke as Leora opened it. The screen showed Alara sitting in the sunroom of our house. She wore the same cream-colored sweater she often wore on quiet Sunday afternoons. There were dark circles beneath her eyes that I had somehow failed to notice at the time. She looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Something has happened that I hoped would never become necessary. I felt every muscle in my body tense. She took a slow breath. I am recording this because I no longer trust every document carrying my signature. Leora immediately paused the video. We need to document this properly. She activated recording software to preserve the playback before pressing play again. Alara continued. Several weeks ago I discovered inconsistencies between copies of legal papers that were supposed to be identical. I confronted the person responsible without revealing how much I knew. Since then, I have felt increasingly pressured to approve revisions I never requested. I leaned closer to the screen. She never mentioned names. Instead, she carefully chose every word. If these records disappear, whoever removed them wants control over decisions that belong to my family. Please trust the original copies stored separately. The recording ended after less than 4 minutes. Silence filled the room. I stared at the blank monitor. I don't understand, I finally whispered. Why wouldn't she tell me? Leora answered carefully. Maybe she wanted to protect you until she had proof. I lowered my head. That sounded exactly like Alara. She never accused anyone without evidence. Leora opened another recovered folder containing correspondence with Rydian Mercer. At first glance, everything appeared ordinary. Meeting schedules, legal updates, routine estate revisions. Then one email stood out. It referenced a private meeting that supposedly took place on a Thursday afternoon. I remembered that date immediately. Alara had spent the entire afternoon with me visiting my sister in another town. She couldn't possibly have attended Mercer's office. Leora compared the email's metadata against server records. The message wasn't sent when it claims. What does that mean? It means the timestamp was manipulated before being archived. One false email might have been dismissed as a clerical error. Combined with deleted files and Alara's recorded warning, it became something much more serious. For the first time since the funeral, I stopped asking whether someone had betrayed my wife. Instead, I began asking a different question. How many years had this betrayal been quietly unfolding without either of us realizing it? The evidence continued to grow, but one question refused to leave my mind. If Rydian Mercer had manipulated my wife's legal documents, why had Darian blocked me from attending the funeral? My son had always been stubborn, but he was not cruel. He loved his mother deeply. Even during difficult years, he had never shown me the kind of coldness I witnessed at the cemetery. Something had changed him, and I was beginning to believe that someone else had engineered that change. 2 days after recovering Alara's deleted files, Leora received authorization to obtain additional records connected to Mercer's legal practice. She invited me to her office as soon as the first batch arrived. The conference room table was covered with folders, printed emails, banking records, and timelines connecting events from the previous several months. I think we've been asking the wrong question, Leora said as she pointed to a sequence of dates. I looked closer. What do you mean? We've focused on Mercer. But Mercer needed someone inside your family to make his plan work. The question isn't who helped him willingly. It's who believed they were doing the right thing. My thoughts immediately turned toward Darian. I don't want to believe my son betrayed us. I'm not asking you to believe it, Leora replied calmly. I'm asking you to let the evidence speak. She handed me a folder labeled with Darian's name. Inside were copies of emails Mercer had sent him during the month before Alara's death. At first they appeared ordinary. Mercer offered legal updates, explained funeral preparations in advance because Alara's illness had become more serious, and repeatedly assured Darian that everything was being handled according to his mother's wishes. Then I noticed something disturbing. Several attachments were marked as confidential medical correspondence. Leora slid the papers toward me. Read them carefully. The documents claimed that I had recently undergone neurological evaluations, showing signs of progressive memory impairment. According to the reports, I supposedly struggled to distinguish recent conversations from older memories and had become emotionally unstable under stress. I stared at the pages in disbelief. This is impossible. I know. I've never even met the physician whose signature appears here. Neither has anyone else. Leora opened another file. The medical license number belongs to a retired doctor who stopped practicing 4 years ago. I leaned back in my chair. So these reports are fake. They're sophisticated forgeries. Everything suddenly began fitting together. If Darian believed I was losing my memory, then every disagreement I raised would appear to confirm Mercer's story. Any attempt to question legal documents would make me seem confused instead of suspicious. He isolated me, I whispered. Leora nodded. Exactly. Later that afternoon, Darian finally agreed to meet us. He arrived looking exhausted, his eyes red from days of grief and sleepless nights. The moment he saw me, he hesitated in the doorway. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Leora broke the silence. Mr. Voss, thank you for coming. Darian sat across from us without looking directly at me. I don't understand why you wanted this meeting. Leora quietly placed the forged medical reports in front of him. Have you seen these before? He nodded. Mr. Mercer gave them to me. When? About 2 weeks before Mom died. What did he tell you? Darian swallowed hard. He said Dad had been diagnosed with severe cognitive decline but refused to accept treatment. He said Mom was worried that emotional stress might cause unpredictable behavior during the funeral, or while the estate was being settled. I felt as though someone had struck me across the face. My own son believed that? Darian finally looked at me. I didn't know what to believe. Mercer had legal documents, medical reports, emails from Mom discussing your condition. Leora reached for another folder. The emails were fabricated. She placed authenticated server records beside the printed messages. These timestamps were altered after the originals were created. Darian stared silently as Leora explained the digital evidence. She described the manipulated metadata, the forged physician credentials, and the recovered backup files containing Alara's video warning. His face slowly lost all color. No, he whispered. That's impossible. It isn't, Leora answered gently. We verified every detail independently. Darian shook his head repeatedly. He told me Dad might become aggressive if he wasn't kept away from the funeral. He said Mom specifically wanted a peaceful ceremony. I closed my eyes. Every painful word from the cemetery suddenly made sense. My son hadn't rejected me because he hated me. He believed he was protecting everyone, including me. Tears filled his eyes as he turned toward me. Dad, I thought I was honoring Mom. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I reached across the table. You were deceived. His shoulders began to shake. I'm so sorry. I placed my hand on his. For now, apologies can wait. Both of us looked toward Leora. She had just received a notification on her laptop. Her expression changed immediately. Mercer has closed his law office, she said quietly. I frowned. What does that mean? She looked directly at both of us. It means he knows we're getting close. The moment Leora announced that Rydian Mercer had abandoned his law office, every conversation in the room came to an abrupt stop. Darian wiped his eyes and leaned forward in his chair. He's running. Leora slowly shook her head. Maybe. But experienced fraudsters rarely disappear without trying to protect what they came for. I frowned. You think he's after something else? I do. She turned her laptop so both of us could see the screen. A timeline of financial transactions filled the display. Mercer hasn't transferred large amounts of money into his personal accounts. That's unusual. Most estate fraud eventually leads to stolen cash. Darian stared at the records. So what was he stealing? Leora zoomed in on another series of documents. Authority. Neither of us understood. She opened a copy of Alara's original estate plan beside the altered version recovered from the deleted files. Look carefully. At first glance they appeared nearly identical. Then I noticed one paragraph that had been completely rewritten. The original document granted controlling voting rights in the Vermont Biomedical Foundation to an independent oversight board after Alara's death. The altered version transferred temporary voting authority to a legal trustee. That trustee was Rydian Mercer. I felt my stomach tighten. He never wanted our money. No, Leora replied. He wanted control. The Vermont Biomedical Foundation had been established decades earlier by Alara's grandfather to support medical research across several universities. While the foundation itself held significant financial assets, Individual trustees could influence which research projects received millions of dollars in grants every year. Mercer had not been trying to become rich overnight. He had been trying to control where enormous amounts of funding would flow for years to come. Darian slowly leaned back. So if nobody questioned the documents, he would quietly gain influence over every future funding decision, Leora finished. And because everyone trusted him as your family's attorney, very few people would question his authority. That afternoon, federal investigators officially joined the case. The evidence recovered from Alara's cloud archive, the forged medical reports, and the manipulated legal documents established probable cause for search warrants covering Mercer's office, financial records, and electronic devices. Unfortunately, by the time agents entered his office, it had already been emptied. Shelves stood bare. Hard drives had been removed. Paper files had vanished. Only abandoned furniture remained. One younger investigator sighed. "We're too late." Leora disagreed. "No." She pointed toward several network cables still connected beneath an empty desk. People who erase physical evidence often forget about digital habits. Forensic technicians quickly discovered that Mercer's office computer automatically synchronized with a secure remote server every evening. Although the local machines had disappeared, the synchronization logs remained accessible through the hosting provider. Several hours later, another breakthrough arrived. Mercer's encrypted account had suddenly become active. He was attempting to authorize the transfer of temporary voting authority, using electronic authentication from a location outside the city. Leora immediately contacted federal agents. "Do not interrupt him yet." The room became silent. One investigator looked confused. "You want us to let him continue?" "I want him to believe he's succeeding." The electronic authorization required several verification steps before becoming legally effective. Each step created detailed access logs identifying the device, location, authentication token, and user credentials involved. If Mercer completed every stage himself, there would be no possibility of claiming someone else had accessed his account. An hour later, investigators traced the login to a private airport terminal, nearly 100 miles away. Mercer had booked a one-way international flight scheduled to depart within 40 minutes. Federal agents positioned themselves quietly throughout the terminal, while investigators continued monitoring the authorization process. Mercer remained completely unaware. He opened his laptop, inserted a secure authentication key, entered multiple passwords, reviewed the digital estate documents. Finally, he clicked the confirmation button that would have transferred temporary authority over the foundation. The system immediately recorded every action. That was the signal. Agents surrounded him before he could even close the laptop. Witnesses later reported that Mercer remained remarkably calm during the arrest. "I've done nothing illegal," he reportedly told the agents. His confidence disappeared after forensic specialists unlocked the encrypted storage devices found inside his briefcase. The laptop contained draft versions of forged wills belonging to other clients, fake medical evaluations prepared for multiple families, encrypted payment records tied to shell consulting firms, private correspondence discussing strategies for quietly gaining legal control over charitable organizations whose elderly owners lacked close oversight. The investigation instantly expanded beyond my family's tragedy. Mercer had not created a single elaborate deception. He had built an entire business around exploiting trust. Late that evening, Leora called Darian and me back to her office. "The arrest was successful," she said. "But there's something else." She placed one final inventory sheet on the table. Among the property recovered from Mercer's briefcase was a small steel key labeled only with a handwritten number. Investigators had already matched it to a private safe deposit box, rented under a corporate name connected to Mercer. Inside that box, they expected to find whatever he considered too valuable to leave anywhere else. Leora looked directly at me. "I have a feeling your wife's final answers have been waiting there all along." The following morning, I accompanied Leora and two federal investigators to the downtown branch of Ashbourne National Bank. The streets were still wet from the storm that had kept me outside my wife's funeral only a few days earlier. It felt strange how quickly life continued for everyone else. People hurried toward offices carrying coffee cups, buses followed their usual routes, and shop owners unlocked their doors as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet for me, every hour seemed connected to the next by a single question. What had Alara known before she died? The bank manager escorted us into a secure underground vault, after carefully verifying the federal warrant authorizing access to the safe deposit box connected to Ridian Mercer's shell company. Thick steel doors slowly opened one after another until we reached a narrow room lined with hundreds of numbered compartments. The manager located the box. Number 417. He inserted the bank's master key while an investigator used the second key recovered from Mercer's briefcase. The lock clicked open. Everyone remained silent. Inside the box were several sealed envelopes, a portable solid-state drive, handwritten notebooks, and a small cedar box tied with a cream-colored ribbon. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized the ribbon. Alara always wrapped personal gifts that way. Leora carefully examined everything before allowing me to touch the cedar box. It isn't evidence of a crime by itself, she said quietly. You may open it. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside rested a handwritten letter. The envelope carried two names, Selim and Darian. I immediately recognized Alara's handwriting. The room seemed to disappear around me as I unfolded the pages. My dearest Selim and Darian, if you are reading this together, then events unfolded exactly as I feared. I hoped my suspicions would prove unnecessary, but hope is not evidence. That is why I prepared this letter long before anyone knew it existed. Trust is precious, but trust without verification can become dangerous. Please do not blame one another before you know the full truth. I paused, unable to continue for several seconds. Darian quietly stepped beside me. Keep reading, he whispered. I took another breath. I began noticing inconsistencies in legal drafts prepared during routine estate reviews. At first I assumed they were simple clerical mistakes. Then I realized changes continued appearing after documents had supposedly been finalized. Rather than confronting everyone immediately, I started making duplicate records, scanning every revision, and recording private meetings whenever I felt uncomfortable. If someone was manipulating my estate, I wanted proof instead of accusations. She had never told me, not because she doubted me, because she wanted undeniable evidence before placing our family in the middle of a legal battle. The final page contained one sentence that left both Darian and me speechless. If deception succeeds, it often divides the people who love each other most. Please refuse to let that become your family's legacy. Neither of us spoke. We simply stood there in silence. Leora gently collected the remaining contents of the safe deposit box. The portable drive contained complete backups of Alara's original estate records, recorded meetings with Mercer, and written notes documenting every inconsistency she discovered during the previous year. Her careful documentation eliminated every remaining legal dispute surrounding the estate. Within weeks, the probate court formally restored her authentic estate plan. The Vermont Biomedical Foundation remained under independent oversight exactly as Alara intended. Research grants that Mercer had hoped to control continued supporting hospitals, universities, and medical laboratories across the region. Several scholarship programs were expanded using funds recovered during the investigation, allowing young researchers to continue work that might someday save lives. I knew Alara would have smiled knowing that her determination protected far more people than she had ever imagined. The criminal investigation moved quickly after that. Prosecutors uncovered years of similar schemes, hidden beneath Mercer's respected reputation. Elderly clients had been pressured into unnecessary legal revisions. Families had been separated through carefully crafted lies. Forged correspondence and fabricated medical reports had become standard tools in his operation. Former business associates who once admired him now testified against him in exchange for reduced sentences. After a lengthy trial, Ridian Mercer was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. His law license was permanently revoked, his assets were seized, and several victims received financial restitution from court-ordered recoveries. His greatest punishment, however, was losing the reputation he had spent decades building through deception. The legal victory did not erase our grief. Nothing could. A month after the trial concluded, Darian asked if I would return to the cemetery with him. This time there were no security guards, no guest lists, no locked gates, only quiet paths lined with fresh grass and the sound of birds returning after the rain. We stood together before Ilara's headstone carrying a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. "I'm sorry," Darian said softly. "I let someone convince me that protecting Mom meant shutting you out." I placed the flowers beside the grave. "You believed a lie that was carefully designed to deceive you. What matters is what you chose after learning the truth." He nodded slowly. "I almost lost both of my parents." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "But you didn't." For several minutes we simply stood together in silence, remembering the woman who had held our family together for so many years. The pain remained, but it no longer felt poisoned by unanswered questions. As we walked back toward the cemetery gate, I looked once over my shoulder. The rain had finally disappeared. I realized I had not only uncovered the truth behind my wife's final weeks, but also fulfilled the promise I unknowingly made the moment those guards refused to let me inside her funeral.